Hello there and welcome to Eventful Arabia. This is the podcast that's going to keep you up to date in terms of what's happening with events right around the region here, particularly in the Gulf. So much going on here, and we've put together this show just for you. I'm Eithne Treanor and I'm going to be your host for the programme, Eventful Arabia. Carl Shaw. Carl, thank you so much for being with us. You're the head of operations for People.
And I think that's what I really like about the region in general is, you know, there's no resting on your laurels here. Dubai's always had this reputation for if you can dream it, you can do it.
And so there must be some big challenges in place putting on events like this.
I think when you fail to understand the culture and what drives the people here and the level of expectation, you're not going to succeed in this industry.
And there's a bit of showmanship here. I mean, this is what events it's all about.
If you can succeed in events here, you can plan an event anywhere in the world. Everybody should watch this space for what Saad is about to bring to the table, because it can only be great.
I'm Eithne Treanor and I'm going to be your host for the programme. And joining me on this inaugural show, and there will be many, many more, I can promise you that, is Carl Shaw. Carl, thank you so much for being with us. You're the head of operations for People, a live events organisation, so the perfect person to actually start with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Now, tell us just a little bit, I suppose, what's making the Gulf region so special at the moment?
I think you can't escape the fact that, you know, everything here feels like a spectacle. I think Abu Dhabi and Dubai especially want the eyes of the world on the UAE, and it's not just for the sake of having the eyes on the country. I think there's a real vision, there's a strategy, and there's an aspiration that underpins everything that the leadership is doing here, and they really want to progress, particularly the UAE, but I think as well, I think that it offers a foundation for the wider GCC region as well. And I think having the eyes on the UAE and its capabilities and its progression and its development can only be a good thing for the country going forward.
Bring us back a little bit, because it didn't all just start a couple of years ago. I mean, this has been going on here for a while. So give us a feel for, you know, why it all started here and the progress, I guess, that it's making.
Well, not to give the viewers a history lesson or anything, but I guess the biggest thing that happened here in terms of a global event was the expiration of the British treaties here.
Going back that far, I mean, and that was, a big event.
It was, yeah, I think so. And as well, in terms of, you know, the UAE wanting to celebrate that. I think the country as a whole is a hospitable country. There's this real sort of underlying appreciation for celebration. Yeah, and so obviously annually National Day became sort of the biggest event in the country. And then from that, I think there was a recognition that the oil wouldn't sort of support the country forever. And so in the mid 80s, I believe that the country started to think about diversification. And I think there was a focus on tourism at that point. And when you focus on tourism, you have to give people a reason to want to come to the country.
And they can't sit on the beach all day. So
exactly.
Let's look at the business side of it in terms of the growth of, you know, all kinds of events. I mean, yes, live events and concerts and all of the fun stuff. But also when we look at business events, there's so much going on here as well, isn't there?
A huge amount. Yeah, the MICE industry is booming. And, you know, you've got icons of sort of the MICE industry, like DWTC. ADNEC in Abu Dhabi as well. The infrastructure exists, and I think that there's been a massive focus on that. It's been part of that strategic vision from the outset. When they talked about diversification, they really meant it, and they went full force with that.
And indeed, having the infrastructure here, and I can see a lot of the hotels are building like bigger ballrooms and bigger facilities, but it's almost, you know, outgrown its capabilities as well. I mean, things are getting big. We have huge events here. We have ADIPEC in Abu Dhabi, the biggest energy show in the world now. Yeah. And again, I think it could do with a few more layers of ADNEC.
It probably could, yeah.
But hopefully we'll see that expansion. But again, we've had some record-breaking events. Talk to us a little bit about that in terms of the big events that are actually breaking global records.
Yeah, well, I mean, National Day has aspirations every year to do that. And I think, you know, we want to make sure that we're putting on the biggest show we can, certainly creatively. But you only have to look at the sort of UAE sort of fireworks shows. You know, RAC held a record in, I think, the 2020s New Year's Eve fireworks. Had something crazy, hundreds of thousands of firework shells. not content with that, they topped themselves the following year. So they held the record and then decided that they could do better. And I think that's what I really like about the region in general is, there's no resting on your laurels here. It's like there's always a desire to improve.
And again, talking about that desire to improve, I mean, yes, we've seen, I think, that impulse to be the biggest and the best, and the shows that are coming here and the time and effort and energy that they're putting in. Do you think that this is, the growth prospects in this industry? Are they endless right now, do you think?
I think so. I think, and when you start to look, wider than the UAE with, the advent of Saudi Arabia's tourism industry, the possibilities here are endless, and particularly for a freelancer or an event professional that's looking for opportunities, there's nowhere really better than the UAE and the GCC to come, develop your skills and be really successful in this industry.
Let's talk now about investment and size and scope.
The country really want to put their best foot forward in terms of their messaging. Obviously, any country would want to do that. And so, not to say that, there's no expense spared, but there is a certain desire to make sure that messages are received in a certain way, and sometimes that costs money. Not only that, I think the level of creativity here is... I don't think you find it anywhere else in the world. It's that sense that Dubai's always had this reputation for if you can dream it, you can do it. And I think from a creative perspective, that certainly exists in our industry. And clients here expect, the biggest, the best, the spectacle.
And something with a little bit of an edge. Talk to me a little bit about that, because when we look, it's fine to see these events, delivered and they're looking spectacular, but the work that goes into it in advance. So talk to me about the growth in terms of the agencies, the creative agencies, all of the people that spend so much time designing and planning and putting all of these together. What is the growth like there when it comes to particularly the region? And maybe just let's look at the UAE to start.
Yeah. I think, in the early days of the industry, I certainly wasn't here for it. My history in the UAE has only been in the last 10 years. But there have been agencies that have come and gone. I think a lot of global agencies saw potential here and thought that they could apply a Western approach, for want of a better term, to the way that events are run here. And I think it just didn't work. I think when you fail to understand the culture and what drives the people here and the level of expectation, you're not going to succeed in this industry. I think the agencies that have survived here have been the ones that have really sort of integrated into the community, the culture, that understand the expectation, and will stop at nothing to get those events seen, I guess.
Talk to me more about the creative side of it. I mean, are you finding among your peer group that are here that this is an industry that is attracting more innovative and creative people from around the world?
I think there is a emerging sort of creative community here. I think it's been slow. I think there has been a desire to bring in international talent for the kudos of being able to do that. And I think that hasn't been a barrier for the country because to a certain extent they can afford to do that. So there's been no real need for a creative community to be based in the UAE. That being said, what we've seen, particularly over the last 5 years, I would say, is a focus from leadership, I guess, to create those creative economies. So we see it in the regeneration of the MENA district in Abu Dhabi. We see it in Al Circle Avenue. We see it in Dubai Design District. There is a desire to bring creative talent to the UAE and allow them to make it their home. And I think that has started to happen only very recently, from my perspective, but it is happening now.
And of course, in a region like this, but indeed any region, I think globally, it's not quite cyclical, but we have a bit of downtime, I think, in the summer when it comes to events. So there's a few months when not a lot is happening. How has this helped, I suppose, deliver opportunities for a freelance community to actually start building on the event space?
Yeah, I think, we have this idea of the season, a time when it's cool enough to do events outside that kind of runs September to April. What we've actually found is that season seems to expand further and further into sort of May and June at the moment. What we find from an agency perspective, and what a lot of agencies, I imagine, do, is to use those low season periods to sort of reevaluate the direction, look at who else is in the market in terms of innovation, supply chain, and of course you're planning and you're pitching for the next season. It is very rare, certainly for our agency, to be awarded sort of a multi-year contract, and I think that's because there's a desire to keep sort of innovation as fresh as possible. So we find that we are constantly pitching for the next project, the next event, the next iteration of an event. It's particularly rare to sort of see those multi-year contracts in place. So you do find yourself being still active in those quiet months. It's more planning, pitching, business development than it is delivery.
And indeed, that's probably good too, because when it's busy here, it's very, very busy. So you do need a little bit of that downtime. Now, you talked about major events here, record-breaking events. And let's just look at the region. We've had World Cup in Qatar. We've had Expo 2020 here. I mean, huge events. There must be some big challenges in place putting on events like this.
Yeah, I imagine there are. Infrastructure changes must be one of them. I think the benefit of the UAE is the availability of land, that you can create a city out of nothing in a matter of years. And
the turnaround, exactly. Things get built very quickly when they're needed.
Incredibly quickly. And I think I think the UAE are really, really good at pulling in the right international resources where needed. We have this idea of sort of, from a organizing committee perspective, an international organizing committee, there's this idea of the caravan. It's this sort of body of IP that just kind of goes around the world and helps to sort of build that structure to succeed. And that won't go away because that's needed. And that's always going to be very transient and moves around as it's needed. But what those mega events have left the UAE with, and I'm sure this happens in Qatar, or will have happened in Qatar, and soon as well in Saudi as they start to host more of these sort of international events, is it leaves behind this body of knowledge, this evolution and this expansion of economy. And these sort of, ecosystems that exist, and then there's offshoots that then just create more diversification in the country. And I think that for a country as small as this to have produced something as big as that is no mean feat, and it should be applauded because it was absolutely incredible.
And indeed, in terms of the ecosystem, we look at Expo City at the moment, and we just look at a very successful COP. And, I think it got great praise from around the world in terms of how it looked, how it felt, and eventually how it was actually delivered. So well done to them in that sense. But you were involved in that too as well. Talk to me about some of the challenges that happened there, and something that was new and different, but it was great space to actually have to deliver an international event as big as that.
It was, and I think Expo have been incredible at establishing sort of a legacy for the city, because you look at other examples around the world where Olympic cities can sort of fall to ruin, and they can't find a use case for them. I think what the UAE did incredibly well was to utilize all of that infrastructure that they built, leverage it, and create a base for other incoming events.
But when you look at the infrastructure of Expo City, you can close it off, you can hold an event that big, and actually move so much around it. That's not something you have in many cities around the world. So it's very special, that space as well, isn't it?
It is. It's incredible. It's a great space. And not only was COP hosted there, but also we had the UAE National Day in Jubilee Park there this year as well. And so while you had this incredible spectacle seems to be this sort of underlying word when we talk about events here. Not only was that epic in magnitude, you also then had, you know, the nation's most beloved event happening alongside it as well, which I just thought was such a beautiful synergy. And the Union Day, rather, as it's now known, sort of echoed a lot of the principles and the values that were being discussed at COP.
One of the other focus areas I know at COP as well, of course, was sustainability. I mean, the very creation of the facility as well. How important was that, and how important is it throughout all events, actually?
Well, incredibly so. I think it's obviously part of the strategic vision going forward, and the year of sustainability was extended into this year as well, and so it's definitely going to be a focus in this year's Union Day as well. I think what it highlighted was there are opportunities here to be able to produce sustainable events, and there was a healthy skepticism about whether that was possible. But I think everybody rose to the challenge, and that included, government entities, in terms of waste management. It included supply chain looking for alternative materials that would support that aspiration. I think the whole industry rallied to make sure that there was an opportunity to fulfill that expectation of the UAE to show the world that it was the right decision to host that event here, and that their aspiration wasn't just a talking piece. It was something that they are absolutely committed to.
When we look at sustainability in the events industry, that has probably years ago it was there and it was maybe part of corporate social responsibility, but now that has really risen to the top, isn't it? And I know even here in the UAE at ADNEC, at the World Trade Center, with all of the organizations who deliver events, we hear a lot more about sustainability, and we're beginning to see it, I think, see it laid out. Why has it now become so important?
I think it's because it's an issue for the next generation. I think you are right to touch on the fact that it did just become a social responsibility tick box, a corporate social responsibility tick box, rather. I think what we're seeing now is this idea among the younger generation that climate change is real, and that it's not just about, using reusable plastics
But everybody is listening. I think the whole industry is listening.
Yeah, I think they are. And I think what we found interesting was the stalwarts of industry even were on board with the challenge of how we could do this differently. And that was really refreshing to see, because it was unexpected, I think.
And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Now, coming back to just size and scope and just the creativity in events, talk to me a little bit of maybe your own experience about things, doing things differently and within events. And that presents challenges, but it delivers, a great show. And there's a bit of showmanship here. I mean, this is what events, it's all about, isn't it? It's performance, it's show, and we need to get it right.
It is, yeah. And I think from our agency's perspective, we've always tried to lead with this sort of guiding principle of being more human and telling a human story, because I think that's what resonates with people. The spectacle's great, but if there's no emotional connection, it doesn't really live on with you beyond that moment. And I think that has started to echo out into the industry a little bit more. And I think people are starting to appreciate the need for more of an emotional connection to events.
We have to have something memorable there, and people want to go away feeling good and actually thinking, that was a great show. It looked good, it felt good, and hopefully people got some great value out of it. Carl, talk to me about how technology is actually changing how we deliver events. The look and the feel. A lot is happening when it comes to lighting, when it comes to stage design, all of that. What's new and different, and what's working?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of innovation in audiovisual. I think where we've really seen the biggest advancements is in sort of pushing the boundaries of engineering. So Union Day this year, we had a revolving stage, which was comprised of around, I think, 17 rooms. And each of those rooms had its own vignette. And it revolved around the audience. We had 600 people in the audience.
Fascinating.
It was.
I missed that one.
Yeah, it was quite a feat. Jubilee Park. So as the audience arrived, they sort of walked through this sort of beautiful environment that we'd built in Jubilee Park, entered through the back of the Revolve. So you would actually walk through the stage to reach the seating platform, and you would take your seats. And to a certain extent, you were kind of locked in there for the next 25 minutes to experience this show that would just revolve around you, and it was quite stunning.
Well, that's fascinating, because I often do some conferences in the round, but someone in the audience gets my back and gets the back of other people. So the fact that a revolving stage, clearly it has to go a little bit slow, you know, but everybody gets the full experience. I think that's what's so exciting.
Yeah, and I think what it allowed was this opportunity to create new scenes incredibly quickly. And, you know, with kind of the world's heads of state in the audience, and only 25 minutes to show them what the UAE was about, that was an incredible challenge for us to be able to do that in a meaningful way. And I think it just felt ingenious to be able to change scenes and, you know, create new atmospheres and new environments so quickly. I think it was an incredible feat of engineering.
Absolutely. Do you think an audience now is expecting to go to even a conference, even a business conference, and really come away with more of an experience rather than just sit there and get information delivered to them?
I think so. I think we're kind of overwhelmed with stimulation. We've kind of seen everything because we've got everything at our fingertips. So the challenge to be able to keep somebody's attention in a live environment is incredibly real. And how do you do that? And the spectacle is one way to do that. But as we've found, there is something missing from that sort of digital stimulation, and that it feels like that human and emotional connection. And that's really where we found a sweet spot in being able to produce meaningful and impactful events.
And again, I think when you talk about that personal connection, you know, when we look at back in the days of COVID, when people thought that we were really going to be, you know, online forever, and that maybe the events industry maybe had seen its demise, that was very quickly proven wrong. And people came back in force to live events.
They did.
What is that special connection that you think is about having an event? And it really has to be live now, unless, you know, it's somebody incredibly important. Nobody is coming in on a video conference anymore. They either show up or they're not there. Yeah,
I think for me, it feels like this idea of community, something that we were so starved of during COVID. You know, we were so isolated, and you were experiencing family connections and friend connections through a screen. And I think people missed kind of engaging all of their senses, you know, and I think that's why the desire to get back out and into a live environment.
It's so important. I mean, it really is. And I remember, I think one of the big shows in Abu Dhabi, the big energy show, it just happened to be the ADPEC show. Sorry, I'm saying it again, but it was more people, I think, than ever before. It was the first big show in this region, and people came from all over the world. I mean, I think the organizers were even astounded at the numbers that showed up.
Right.
So the idea of staying online, I think we put that one on mute permanently.
I think we have to. I think there were certainly some benefits to it. And I think, you know, where we've seen those benefits have been more in hybrid working. It's been about being able to leverage international talent. You know, I think this idea that you have to be in front of each other to be able to produce an event, I think the idea of that has dissipated a little bit. I think the live event experience from an audience perspective is still very real, but I think the way that we plan events has changed a lot. And I think technology and remote working and hybrid working has kind of fostered that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what goes on in the background can be happening from anywhere in the world. And very often in the run-up to an event, I find, I'm talking to people from all over the world who are literally coming together to plan a show.
Yeah.
And that's quite exciting too, because it brings a lot more diversity into the planning of a show, and then people show up on the day.
I think so. And I think what we found as well is, you know, we know the rapid pace at which we have to produce events here. I've always had this kind of feeling that if you can succeed in events here, you can plan an event anywhere in the world. But what we found most exciting and most impactful for us was kind of leveraging time zones. It was this simple thing of, okay, we can brief somebody in Canada or in Australia at 5:00, and they continue to sort of produce CAD or designs overnight, and we wake up and it feels like this 24-hour way of working that just means we can continue to deliver for our clients at a super rapid pace.
And that's so important. I mean, and it's a gift to actually have that, to be able to close off a day with instructions and you to come back in the morning and there you go. I never thought about that. It's great. Talk to me a little bit about, is there a global ranking right now in terms of events and where people look at, and where does the Gulf fit within that?
I think I'm not sure if there is an official global rank. I think it depends on your metric, but I think it would be hard for Dubai not to appear somewhere near the top of those lists, or the UAE in general, really. I think the infrastructure and the capability has been proven time and time again. And, if you were to compare the types of events that we have here, the events, global events that are happening anywhere else in the world, you look at the World Cup just happened in Qatar, a tiny country in comparison to the US, but hosted the World Cup beautifully. I think there was this idea of, the world knew what they wanted to feel about the World Cup being in Qatar, and they were proved wrong. I think Qatar's infrastructure worked and delivered for what the World Cup needed. Another example might be London 2012. Abu Dhabi hosted the Special Olympics in 2018. I think it was. I should know when it was because we actually ran the ceremonies. But I don't think there's any barrier to what the UAE can achieve in terms of hosting international events. The infrastructure exists, the capability exists, the strategy is there in terms of if the right resources aren't in country, this country knows where to find them and knows where to bring them in and knows how to leverage it.
Now, of course, we're getting a little bit of competition in the region as well, and we see the rise of big events in Saudi Arabia. And you've got to remember, not too long ago, Saudi could not have events. They didn't hold these. So talk to me again about the appeal for many of the big events that are happening in Saudi Arabia and how that's generally helping the entire industry in the region.
I think from a freelance perspective, it's incredibly lucrative to be working in Saudi Arabia. I think where they've been incredibly astute as an emerging country in sort of tourism and events is that they knew that the talent existed regionally. They just had to incentivize it to come to Saudi Arabia. What that's meant for the UAE is that there is now this, I wouldn't call it a void, but I would call it a distillation of talent, if you like, which has provided opportunities, I think, for a new wave of talent to sort of come through. Somebody asked me the other day, do you think the Gulf region can sustain all of these events and
I was going to ask you that one too. Yes.
and I think it absolutely can. The advent of that kind of emerging economy in Saudi probably means that there's a gentle migration to Saudi to kind of support that vision for them, and I think the last statistic I saw on the UAE events industry was the economy is worth about $165 billion right now, and that's only set to increase by about 25% in the next 3 years. And the industry actually supports, I think it is around 100,000 jobs at the moment. That's set to increase by another 10,000 over the next couple of years as well.
So when you look at the growth and scale, do you think that this is going to continue?
I think so. I think as long as the ambition exists within the leadership of this country, absolutely that trajectory will continue. Because to stay relevant, you have to continue telling the world why you're relevant. And the best way to do that is through live communication.
Okay. Now, when we look, further afield in terms of the value of events. And of course, here at Eventful Arabia, we want to be covering the entire region because we can see what's happening, on a regional level. The prospects for the region, because there's so much attention focus here. And now we see Dubai and Riyadh. They're on the same lists now as New York and Paris and London. They used not be. So globally, I mean, that's doing wonders for the region in terms of, I think, making it visible. You talked about communication. That's really what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's proved itself as a global player. Through that diversification, that move away from oil, it's just created all of these additional economies and ecosystems that can compete with those international cities. All of that kind of vibrancy that exists in somewhere like New York, okay, to maybe a lesser extent here, but there are those vibrancies that exist. There are those communities that are emerging that give a different feel to what Dubai was, or what you thought Dubai was. I think for anybody that hasn't been here or came here 20 years ago and came back would be astounded by how much diversity and vibrancy there is in a city like this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I came here 20 years ago and just stayed. So it's like I can see the progress. And it really has been quite spectacular over the years. But the other wonderful thing, I think, as well, is the growth of venues, the infrastructure that's here. We have, yes, the World Trade Center in, Dubai. We have Adnec. We have the Etihad, the stadium. We have the Coca-Cola Arena. I mean, we have more and more venues. And that must also be attractive. And again, especially to live events, music events, it's not all about business.
No. And I think what's beautiful about this country is if a venue doesn't exist, they build one. And again, as we've talked about at a rapid pace, there's, if there is this continuing need for places to host international events and bring sort of inward investment into the country, the UAE absolutely capitalize on that.
And again, I think it's the speed at which it can be done. If there's not an event, and they can always build a temporary one and, put it up, put it down. And that comes back then even to sustainability. And I think that's a factor when they are building that now. I think they're a lot more conscious because the industry alone, like many other industries, is, up there in terms of emissions. And we all have to be very mindful, I think, and we all have to be very careful about that. But we talked earlier about the fact that that's very much on the priority list for people. And it will continue to be. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think it will. And I think we were talking about it as an agency quite recently. And our feeling is if we can create the demand, the market will react to that. We produce events, with revenues of hundreds of millions of dirhams every year. So, the buying power for an agency like ours, supported by government entities that we work for, can create that change and can insist on sustainable alternatives. And that's something that we're incredibly focused on in everything that we do, alternative materials, looking at reuse, looking at onward life. I think all of those things are very much in the forefront of our minds now when we go into anything that we do. It doesn't matter for what client.
So clearly it's a very, very vibrant market. It's, I get the feel it's the place to be at the moment. Just give us a quick feel for, prospects for maybe the year ahead. Do you think it's a busy year that's in place? And are you optimistic that the events industry is absolutely thriving in this neighbourhood?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think for us, we're focused quite heavily in the upcoming season on cultural events in particular, festivals, things that sort of the nation can be proud of and attend. From a wider sort of GCC perspective, Saudi is just booming, and I think everybody should watch this space for what Saudi's about to bring to the table because it can only be great.
Indeed, I think the whole region is booming, and that's very, very exciting, the plans that are in place. So everybody, I think, keep an eye on that events diary because there's lots going on. Carl Shaw from People, I want to thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And this has been our first episode of Eventful Arabia, giving you a backstage look at what's going on in the events industry. We have so much more to cover in the podcasts to come. So be sure and keep an eye, send us some suggestions, and we'll be here to bring you up to date and let you know what's happening in Eventful Arabia.